The Disrupt Education vlog can be found on YouTube. To hear it in podcast form, search Disrupt Education on any of the following podcast platforms: Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Castbox, Overcast, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, Spotify, or Stitcher. Welcome to this episode of Disrupt Education. I have two guests, science teachers and innovators, Sam Long and River Suh, with me today. We will start with you, River. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what's your educational path?
I thank you so much for having us. I'm currently in San Francisco helping out a lot of high school science teachers. But I've taught in middle school and high school environments, and I mostly teach biology and physiology. I forgot your second question.
The second question is your path, but let's introduce Sam. Hi, Sam. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Hi. So I'm a high school science teacher in Denver, Colorado. I've been teaching for 5 years this year, and I currently teach biology and chemistry.
My second question, River, was what is your educational path? What does that look like through now? Because I think you have both very different backgrounds, teaching and education, and then your path to education. So if you wouldn't mind bringing us up to speed on that.
I started as a bioarchaeologist, looking mostly at ancient populations and analyzing their skeletons. And then I went over into law and got my JD. And I started working with things like creating new constitutions or legislative drafting for intellectual property. As I got into that and moved on into academic publishing, I started really ramping up my interdisciplinary publishing pathways. And I was looking at a lot of gaps in how we were addressing both the way students understand the world, but also in the way that we are defining ourselves in relationship to each other. And so I entered teaching and got my master's at Stanford about 3 years ago, really looking at how to help teachers scaffold and create supports that are hyper-local, that really address the strengths that a lot of our underserved students bring to the classroom. So I'm coming at it from from a systemic, legal, and scientific workplace perspective is, and what that asks of the students.
And excellent. That's such a all the way around you see. So we're gonna talk a little bit about the curriculum that you all are working on, which is very interesting. Sam, you've been in the classroom for 5 years. You said. Tell us a little bit about your educational path to that.
Well, my educational path leading up to being an educator consisted of, first off, I went to school in Canada. My family immigrated there right about when I started going to school. Mm-hmm. And my family is a family of scientists. So that's like my background. I've always been able to feel a part of science, able to participate in science and know some of the things ahead of time, and ultimately get a bachelor's degree in science. And my perspective in teaching is focused on recognizing that not all students have that. Some students have no push in their lives that is getting them to think, well, I could possibly do science, and matters to me, and this is a part of me. And I found that really affects students' attitudes toward learning science. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. And so in the 5 years that I've been teaching, one of my focuses has become, as a teacher who's out as trans to my students, how do I talk about the way that gender, sex, and sexuality relate to or fit into science? Because I can't just go and give a typical lesson where I say X and XY chromosomes are what make you a man or a woman. I wouldn't want to do that for my students and commit that oversimplification, and it also is not my truth in the first place. So that's was kind of my bridge into talking about gender inclusion in biology.
So let's go deeper into that, because this is really innovative curriculum, speaking truths and bringing it into science. So when you contacted me, I was ecstatic, because this is something that we are, as River said, we are missing a lot of pieces in education. And I think where are you guys going? How are you doing this in the biology or the science realm? Can you explain a little bit about how this came about with a team, because we have a third person who's not with us today, and what did that look like from building it to actually implementing it in schools?
So the team consists of myself, River, and our third collaborator, Louis Mayday Travis, who's a high school teacher in the Seattle area. And it started the near the end of last year, where I started to put together a I started to put together a presentation for a conference called Gender Conference NYC, and I felt I had been doing this work of in big and small ways, talking about gender in biology for a couple of years. But most teachers have no entry point, or even some don't even have an awareness that this is necessary and
Right.
that it could benefit their students. So it started that way. Um, what our work consists of now is creating teacher professional development workshops for science teachers, um, building a web of resources on our website that's currently in development, and publishing some articles to get this idea out there to kind of plant the seed that the science teachers need to be thinking more about this. And we know that some folks have done that in the past. There are kind of uh, there's a few published articles about it. There's a little bit of research from GLSEN as to how that impacts students in STEM fields. But we want to put together a collection of resources that can help any science educator enter this work, no matter where they're coming from.
And if I may add on to what Sam was saying, the timing of this is very critical because, as you can see, so socially we are examining this problem right now. Adults are asking questions that we're not sure how to answer, but that our students already are trying to answer by themselves without us. And so there's really this absence of any competing narratives, and whoever unfortunately bangs their drum the loudest is going to be um, the one that students remember the most, regardless of whether or not it's true. And so, in this regard, we think it's a great time when we're converting over to national science standards, next generation science standards, to really use this opportunity to be phenomenon first, to look at just what the evidence is out there, and to go from that phenomenon to a model to multiple explanations in different contexts. Because we think that this is the sort of perfect intersection of a authentic socially charged topic that really models how professionals recognize human decisions and work in groups. I think it's especially important right now as we're noticing science teachers asking, how do I go phenomenon first? How do I really put the cognitive burden on my students? Well, this is actually a really great way to integrate that in a way that makes students feel like it's authentic. And so we're looking at three different levels. We're looking at the urgency of teachers actually implementing this right now in their classrooms, teachers who are asking really relevant questions of Sam and Lewis at conferences, who are asking for support on Facebook, even just small changes or big changes. The need is there. And we're also looking at translating all of these different policies. There's all of these great ideas and organizations, like Sam was mentioning. A lot of that is couched in language that is really opaque to teachers. And so, how do we both reach and help students currently in classrooms, but also build a more politically and religiously agnostic approach to biology that helps our students deal with genders that we don't even understand yet?
What I like hearing here is this is just the beginning. Is that what I'm hearing? Because I feel like Yeah, there was attempts before, but for some reason, the way that education, the realm is changing, and everybody knows there needs to be changes in education. I feel like this is something beyond biology and science that we can take across curricular activities and such. Are you looking at that yet, or are you still just focusing directly on the science? And how does that look? Taking it from the urgency and the translation and the students to what comes next, because this has so many different layers to it. I think there's so many different places you could put it, and start to understand. So if anybody wants to take that question.
Sam, you've called it low-hanging fruit, right?
Well, there's work in other content areas, certainly in social studies. A couple of states have passed laws teaching the contributions of LGBTQ people in history. There's definitely a lot of work in health and reproductive education, but this really is the beginning for biology. And some of the feedback that we hear talking to teachers is, well, in what way does this belong in biology? But to me, it belongs in biology before it belongs anywhere else, that it explains the diversity of living things, human and non-human. It gives us a more complete understanding of the world rather than going with these oversimplifications that are not exciting or helpful to any student to learn. So low-hanging fruit.
Right. And River, did you want to add something to that? Because I think you're right on. You go to the source, you go to the molecule, and I'm not a big science guy, but I'm excited for science right now.
Well, that's great to know. I think what really is the end goal is to encourage a curricular design that meets students where they are. Just to give you an example, I taught a 11th, 12th grade physiology class where several of the students just did not see themselves as learners in terms of feeling like the classroom environment could benefit them. That was a position that I felt very familiar with my own education in schools. And so by saying, we don't have the answers, but these are the different models and skills adults have used to understand our world and all these confusing questions. We have these tools. Let's create conditions where you can practice interpreting that so that you can do better. And I think that kind of approach to curricular design helps a lot of teachers who don't necessarily feel confident. Like, I have teachers who are like, do I have to be trans to teach about, transgender culture and how it relates to biological sex chromosomes? And I say, well, no, but your kid will probably face somebody who is transgender in their life at some point. So are you going to be able to represent every single person your student meets? No. Can you give them the tools to interpret that? Yes. And so designing a curriculum that is very open to a student perspective of experience is really the foundational support that we're trying to provide here when we design curricula. Like, what do the students really need? And the students right now need something that says, unlike some teachers, hey, you are legitimate, your perspective is legitimate, and it's real.
As an educator for 20 years, I see so much extreme value in this, because students who we all know, students who don't see themselves in the curriculum are very disconnected. Is that something that you all have found, and what kind of, I guess what I'm trying to ask is then, what ways would you continue to change education? So say you had the education system at your hand, and you're already doing this in the science realm, and it is a fantastic. I would have loved a course like this because it's so dynamic and innovative and different, and inclusive, that I'm wondering what you would do if you had the entire system at your hands. What would you change? And I'm looking at a secondary, or we can look at a primary level or any level. So I'm curious to hear that question. So yeah, so how would you change the system to make it better? You're already doing it in one curriculum, but let's take a view of if this, what would it look like when it's completed? What's the big idea goal? And you alluded to it, River, about, we're meeting students where they are. How does that look across the board?
Well, at least for me, and this goes beyond the scope of what our team is doing. We're really looking at specific both small scale changes, like instead of saying men make sperm, you could say people with testes make sperm.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm educating my trans student in risk factors for ovarian cancer, I don't say women have X amount of percentage, etc. I say people with ovaries, and that student has reported that they feel much better. Even at the ninth grade level, I have students who look at the existing way that we teach non-disjunction, meiosis, things like chromosomes, and then I show them my way of teaching, and I say, well, compare these two models. My student literally told me, I like this more because you don't have to change a random rule that says, oh, this doesn't exist, when like we have students and classmates who exist and fall under that description. And so for me, it's about not only having a science curriculum that recognizes we don't know things, and science is about deepening confusion, but also that school needs to be fed not from K to 12 into the workforce, but that the workforce environment needs to be feeding more back into the classroom. So, for example, I just answered a question about osteomyelitis this morning in the National Anatomy and Physiology Teachers Facebook group, and we had 4 physiology teachers who were asking each other what the forensic state standards were for race based on a skeleton.
Mm-hmm.
And those are things that we don't hear a lot of information coming, or it's not reaching a lot of teachers. And we're trying to prepare our students for the future. So I think it's totally understandable for a teacher to be looking at this and saying, I don't even know how to get started because I'm not used to getting that kind of information. I'm not used to interpreting that information from the professional realm, and they're not used to interpreting that for me. And so what I see is emphasizing student agency based on skills, regardless of what the content is. And in the biology curriculum, you can use phenomenon. And I think Sam can add a lot about that in terms of what he's doing with actual teachers in all these workshops.
Mm-hmm.
As to your question about how this looks outside of science curriculum, I'm only really able to identify how teaching about gender, sex, and reproduction affects students and whether they see themselves in that way of teaching or not. I'm able to figure that out because I come from the perspective of a trans person, and because I've talked to students who've been willing to share what they think about that. And I think that's a practice that needs to occur in every classroom, in every content area. I know that a lot of work's been done in social studies, and one of the things that I get to be a part of this year is the Colorado Commission to make recommendations regarding the teaching of the contributions of minorities in civil government. That's a bill that passed this past semester that I get to be on the commission to do work on. And so I'm excited to do that as somebody who comes from science, and think about how that might be a roadmap, or that might be a pathway as to what happens with science. Because there's nothing in the law that says teachers need to do this work right now. There's things in the law about the way we need to teach health and the way we need to teach now social studies in some states. Longer term, I would like to learn from those stories what are some possible roadmaps for this work in biology to become national, to become the standard for how we include our students and how we teach our students.
Yeah, and Peter, you earlier mentioned where race figures into biology.
Yeah.
And I think, looking at instances of ethnic studies, looking at case studies dealing with ethnicity and race in biology, and the HHMI's excellent biology of skin color unit, Pluralism is where it's really serving our students. The idea that we're not saying, oh, we should only focus on transgender people when we're talking about gender, or we should only make something incredibly exceptional and add it. That's not a very integrative curriculum for us. So for us, it's not let's have a standalone lesson just on gender. That is not sufficient because that in itself is still an exceptionalist. It singles it out.
Yes. Yeah.
It's not what we want, right? We want a more integrative, pluralist, content agnostic approach. And I think biology is just one lens to implement that.
Yeah, and the framework that we use for biology really isn't specific to science and can apply to any subject area. Um, but what I identified as 5 features of I'll say a good gender inclusive biology curriculum is that what we're learning is authentic, it's continual, it's not one separate lesson. It feels like a part of the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
It is affirmative of student identities without tokenizing them,
Mm-hmm.
and and that it involves student agency. So, and that is no matter what we're learning about, that students need to have a voice in what topics they're interested in, what they want to learn more about. Because ultimately, to cover our standards, we have a lot of freedom as to what models we look at.
And with that in mind, we also want to meet teachers where they are. And so for the website, as we try to curate and refine more institutionalized guidelines and worksheets for people, we do want to give lots of different levels of strategies that educators at all levels can use. So whether it's small changes that you want to slide under the rug, or I can't remember what the phrase is, small changes you want to kind of sneak in,
Yeah.
because you teach in a state that mandates creationism in your biology curriculum, we have that. If you're in a school where suddenly you have 100% freedom and all the parents really want inclusive education, we also plan to have that kind of curriculum. So we really also want to meet teachers where they are and to lean on their existing experiences.
Yeah, you're leading into my next question, which was, yeah, what are some of the blockers? You have the creationism in certain states. There's different levels of freedom that you have in different schools. Where can people find, do you have a website up now that people can find and get some resources already, or is that being built?
We have some resources existing right now. You can visit genderinclusivebiology.com. We have it organized by curricular examples, which we really want to add more of. We're kind of busy teaching and doing other stuff right now.
Right.
We want to create more of those. We have a learn section where people can look at a 50-state survey of, for example, school district policies for high school transgender athletes.
Mm.
There's that. We recognize that there are lots of teachers that may not be in the best position to say things about science, but may be in a trusted position with students.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to create a whole range, and teachers will be able to find things like talking points with colleagues, talking points with admin, legal protections by state, policies, model district policies by state, passive-aggressive infographics that you can print out and post on your wall. Anything that might work for you. We want to respect that teachers know that teaching is hyper-local and they know what's best for their context and their job security.
When you do look at change in education, what were some of the biggest blockers that you both came up with or have seen in your separate districts or going through this, and how do you suggest a teacher who is in a situation where those blockers do exist, how do you maybe help them strategize to get through some of those walls or blockers?
I think one of the fastest responses that I hear sometimes is we are putting social interpretations into science. You're not teaching the science of it. We're trying to relate this to identity, and those two things don't mix together. But we really see this as a way of teaching more accurate, more modern science that prevents misconceptions.
I really like that. I think, as as a straight white male from Indiana, for me, I have a lot of questions, and I'm sure there's students, and it's everybody's learning in this. Is that the way you feel when you start a program or continue a program somewhere? Do you get that excitement? Because for me, learning something new, even at my old age of 47 right now, is something that is just encouraging and enlightening to me. Can you describe that process when you just get a group of learners on this? What does that look like?
Well, usually science teachers are pretty amenable to learning new things and interested in this. Sometimes we start off presentations with quizzes that it's all like factual questions about gender, sexual, reproductive diversity in human and non-human species. And that always gets science teachers thinking and excited. And maybe there's one that they have heard of or they missed and they want to learn more about. And so that's good that we're starting with that. And you're right, it is a learning process for everyone. I definitely feel like in any lesson where I've prepped and I know I'm going to talk about sex or reproduction, that I feel a little bit more under the microscope because, well, I need to speak precisely and I need to make sure that I'm communicating what I'm trying to. And that awareness, I think, is good. And when I notice things that I wish I had said differently, like one year I went through a whole unit on genetics. We had this unit long project about genetic diseases. And I put, because some students were asking about this, I put a few intersex traits, chromosomal traits like Klinefelter syndrome, XXY chromosomes. And only the end of the unit did I realize, well, I just put that under this project of genetic diseases. We've been using that word disease the whole time. And I wish I had just said, well, these are genetic variations, because that's not the message that I want to send about intersex. And when I brought that up with my students, it was a chance for them as well to see, well, okay, everybody evolves their language and everybody makes mistakes or realizes unintended consequences of their actions. And at least I hope it made them less worried about saying something wrong, but just focused on speaking thoughtfully, speaking inclusively, and learning as they go in that process.
I do like that, because I think one of the things that a lot of teachers are afraid of is actually that, right? Like saying something wrong. But if you're in a learning environment where, okay, hold on, I said this, and you bring that environment together where, it's just really inclusive and people know that, hey, we're not all perfect and we all have a lot to learn. I think that's great. And that's why I get so excited about just new inclusive, especially in the biology realm. I swear I would have been so much more interested in biology if I had you all as teachers, because I remember, just checking the boxes off of regular chromosomes and,
I remember that too.
Right?
It's not exciting.
Yeah, no, not at all.
We all had the same bio experience, which was like, fill out these forms and bubble in the right letter. And we can do better than that.
Yeah, and I think in biology, at least in some high schools I've been at, gets typecast as, well, you just memorize everything, memorize all the words, memorize all the categories, you're going to be good, rather than seeing patterns in the vocabulary, noticing patterns and exceptions. We don't want to teach this rule that there are only male and female, and that's true for every species 100% of the time, because we're just going to be tacking on exceptions to that constantly.
And as we're getting, increasing demographic changes in the classroom, where you have more students that are familiar with language code switching, are familiar with cultural code switching, they're going to have to encounter a lot of different ways of interpreting sex, gender, all of these cultural values that we have as humans. And I think that's where modeling that insecurity and that uncertainty in a healthy way is really important for a teacher, regardless of their gender and sex identity. I remember when I went to a talk with Sherman Alexie, and I asked him, how do I help my American Indian students feel less um, tokenized when we are talking about things like race or certain aspects of history.
Mhm.
And he said, make them feel less alone, make them see that throughout all of human history, we have always struggled with these problems,
Mm.
and we will continue to struggle and redefine them. And this is nothing new under the sun, actually.
I've never heard it put that way, being tokenized, and it makes such makes such sense. Where you're creating a roadmap for people to actually understand this isn't just, hey, a pull-out lesson, which is so invigorating to me. Lastly, where are different places where people can find you and connect with you? Are you going to be at speaking engagements online in different places? Can you tell us a little bit about how people can connect with you? We do have the website, and I'll put that up as well in the podcast. But where are other places where people connect and can find out more about this incredible program that you are building?
I'm gonna get out the recent newsletter with the correct dates for a couple upcoming conferences that we'll be at.
Okay.
And Louis, River, do you want to start saying other places that we can be found?
Yeah, so right now you can find us at www.genderinclusivebiology.com. We have 2 links on there for subscribing to both our monthly newsletter, which we have, Lewis and Sam send that out every month, and we don't share your information with anybody, and you can get very seasonal, timely tips, news updates, and anything that is related to a gender inclusive classroom and curriculum. You can also sign up for the Trans Educators Network. We are a nationwide education network of just transgender educators, people working as staff or faculty in education. And Sam Long is the founder of the Colorado chapter. Sam, please correct me if I'm wrong on that. But
You're right.
they the most updated. I mean, we're updating the website every day and having lots of conversations and changing it based on feedback. So it's very much a living document, and it's very much something we're growing. But to really get connected all the time in this busy day and age, sign up for our newsletters. That is the best way to get updated. Mm-hmm. But you can also see Sam and Lewis at lots of different conferences and workshops throughout the year. And we're getting some interest from other national associations for educators about creating larger scale workshops where we can guide teachers in perhaps workshopping one sample lesson or one sample worksheet, for example.
Sam and River, it's a pleasure to meet and actually talk with you all about just this innovative curriculum that is much needed, bringing a roadmap to an authentic, kind of a continual affirmative with agency. There's so much to this. I can't wait to dig into the website. I'll be signing up for that newsletter. I have a lot to learn. Thank you both for being here on Disrupt Education today.
Thank you. And Sam, I
Thank you for having us.
some upcoming conference dates.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of upcoming appearances.
Yes.
The first is the HRC Time to Thrive conference. We'll be there President's Day weekend, February 14th to 16th, 2020. And the next is the NSTA, National Science Teaching Association National Conference, which is in Boston, April 2nd to 5th, and we'll be there as well doing a very similar presentation for science teachers. So we hope to see you out there.
Excellent. Thank you so much again, Sam and River. Appreciate it. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, we'll talk to you later on Disrupt Education.